to another episode of Quarantined Coaches. This time we are in Pennsylvania with Bucknell University head coach Scott Heather. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So where exactly is Bucknell? I know it's in Pennsylvania, but where exactly is it?
Yeah, we're in Central PA. We're about 30 minutes south of Williamsport, where the Little League World Series is, and north of Harrisburg, centrally located in the state.
Do you ever go to the Little League World Series and start to get an early idea on some potential recruits?
For sure. There's been a bunch of guys over the years that I've seen early there, not necessarily recruiting or anything like that, but I've been here for 15 years now, so I've seen a lot of guys. We've had a couple guys that have played in the Little League World Series. Nobody that I saw there for the first time, but it's certainly nice to have here. Usually school's starting about that time when the Little League World Series is going on. Our freshmen like to go up there and check it out for the first time, and it's pretty cool to have it so close.
Yeah, that is a cool baseball thing to have so close. So how long have you been a head coach, and then where were you as the assistant coach beforehand?
So I was the assistant coach here for 8 years before I became the head coach. And before that, I was at a junior college in Arkansas for 5 years, called West Ark Junior College. It's now the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith, Division II now. Spent 5 years there after coaching 1 year at Arkansas, where I finished up my degree.
So I wanted to get into you and kind of go down this route of what it's like to be a head coach at the college level. It's been really amazing to have most of the guys on here assistant coaches. You realize how many great minds there are coming up in the game. But I haven't gotten the opportunity to talk to too many head coaches and get the angle of what your job is like. So one question I always wanted to ask, we call you guys the head coach, whereas at the next level they're called the manager, right?
Right.
What should it be called at the college level? Is it a head coach or is it a manager? What's the difference at the college level?
For sure. I think it depends on how you set it up. I remember talking to Carl Kuhn as we were looking at when I first got the job and looking at candidates to hire as an assistant. And, I was the pitching coach before I became, the head coach, and the decision whether to continue to do the pitching or hire a pitching coach. And I just felt it too important to not have somebody fully invested day to day, and that's their number one priority is the pitching development. And what he told me was, if it's your passion, don't give it up. But if it's not, it's probably best to be more of a manager and kind of oversee the program. And that's kind of been the setup I've had, over the years. I have one, kind of full-time spot where, there's been, one guy there with me the whole time, Jason Knights, and I have two spots, for a volunteer and my second assistant. It's a great spot to get started and gain a lot of experience and, move on to more of a full-time role.
So let's start there with the staff hirings. Is it hard to keep, a pretty consistent staff at the college level just because, maybe not making enough money or moving in? A lot of these young guys decide, hey, I'm having a family, I need to move into kind of a more consistent job with certain benefits. Is it hard to build and keep a staff at the college level?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely depends upon your school setup, with that. I'm fortunate to have, Jason with me the whole time. He's from the next town over. He played at East Carolina, played in the Giants organization, and he was our volunteer when I got hired, and he was a pitcher, and was able to hire him. And so I've had the continuity there, but it's been difficult in the other spots where it's not a full-time position, and keeping guys, So I've set it up in that way, trying to get, young, energetic guys that are looking to rise in the game, and kind of give them their start, here, and give them some responsibility, and that's really what I promote. I try to set it up so they do gain that experience, and in doing that, I'm able to attract, good young candidates, for the positions, because I'm giving them a role that's going to benefit them in their next stop.
So let's pretend you're starting from scratch, and you have to hire assistants all the way through. What are some of the key characteristics of a hitting coach? And I'm talking more baseball, because I know everybody wants the loyalty part of it, and do they have a history of, responsibility and good human characteristics? But what about baseball experience and what they know and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I think you definitely start with the work ethic and character part, and before you move on to the baseball part. But from a hitting perspective, I'm looking for guys that you know have a background in terms of working with players, have had success with that, and really the assistant coaches, they get to work with the guys more regularly on a daily basis. So I'm looking for somebody that has a passion for that. The way it works at Bucknell, the mornings and early afternoon, a lot of times it's taken up with with class and their studies and that type of stuff. So I'm looking for a guy that's willing, and just would rather drop anything that he's doing to go hit with a guy whenever a guy's available to hit. And I've been fortunate to have some really good guys that really enjoy doing that. And I tell them that in the hiring process, that that's the expectation. The guy wants to hit, and you need to be there for him, because you're the guy working with them every day, building trust. And so really that's a main component that I'm looking for.
What if there, does it matter so much to you, because you mentioned that your style is more of the managerial style of things, and trusting and delegating to the assistant coaches. Let's say a hitting coach comes along and has a great history of sending guys off, right? Or working with kids that have been really successful. But the way they want to teach the game and their style of hitting doesn't match up with yours. I mean, would that be a bad marriage?
Not necessarily. I think, it's important for the head coach to set the vision, for the program and what type of team you want to be. But obviously the players you have drive that a little bit. And, we've had different philosophies from our hitting coaches over the last, several years. And really, at the end of the day, I want to make sure they know that I'm hiring them, and I want them to be themselves, and work within the framework of the vision of the program. But they can't be thinking that I don't like a certain thing that they're trying to do. It's going to inhibit them from really digging into making each guy better. And there's a lot of ways to make guys better, and they should be digging into that. That's where the best progress is made, is when they're really engaged in that part, and taking what they know, trying to apply it to the players.
What about in pitching guys? There's so many. First of all, they're going to be way more analytical, right? And they're going to be way more mechanical and wanting to see this and this. What is it that you would want to see on a pitching coach's resume?
The same type of thing. I want a guy that just loves to work with players. From a pitching aspect, I certainly want guys that have a proven track record, in improving guys' mechanics. But ultimately, it comes down to keeping guys healthy, improving velocity, getting outs. Command is a huge aspect, especially nowadays. We're finding guys do throw harder, but maybe lack the command that maybe we had several years ago. And being able to help guys along in that regard, I think will go a long way. And you can separate yourself if you prove that you can help with command.
Does it matter how long they've been coaching at the Division I level or at the pro level, or would you be willing, if you felt it was a good match, to take on a kid who, let's just say, is 1 year at JUCO level coaching as an assistant?
To me, it's more about the person, and I don't look too much into that. I look mostly into the type of person he is, and is it going to fit into Bucknell as a school and a program. And a lot of times, especially for my second assistant and volunteer spot, I'm going to get a guy that's 1 or 2 years out of school, something like that. They're getting their start, so, and I think that's great. I think that's the fun part of being a head coach, is helping mentor those guys, move them on to the next spot. And I lose out on the coaching aspect of the guys day to day, but I gain in being a mentor and trying to help guys take the next step.
So the big debate and the votes recently have been about a third paid assistant. And I don't think there's any disagreement among the baseball community. Of course, you would love to bring in more staff and be able to financially take care of more guys, right? But I think everybody also knows like it's not that simple. But for you as the head coach, as the manager, how would a third paid assistant, kind of change everything almost in a sense?
For sure. I think it'd free the head coach up in a lot of ways to get on that coaching side a little bit more from here and there. I think a big part of adding a third assistant is keeping the best guys in the college game and making it a better spot for guys to stay. Obviously, we're losing a lot of guys to pro ball, and a lot of them are those young guys. And I think that's a challenge that college baseball is going to have to address. But for me, adding that guy, like one of the things I have a difficult thing doing with my younger guys is giving them too many administrative type activities and things that maybe as a head coach you don't always love to do. I try to set it up in a way where their main focus is working with the guys and that type of stuff. But having another full-time assistant would allow me to put more on those guys and feel all right about it and free me up for big picture items, to build trust with the guys a little bit more. And I think one of the challenges I had in that transition, I was a pitching coach here and obviously a major part of it. And when I first became a head coach, I had that trust built up with our players, because I was with them day to day, both on the pitching side and the hitting side. So I felt like I had good relationships heading into that, and the relationship changes. All of a sudden what you say is received differently as a head coach, and that's something I didn't really think was a big deal, especially in the first couple of years, because I still was kind of an assistant coach. I just was running the program. So that took a little bit of an adjustment when those guys started to graduate out, and it's more difficult to develop that close and trustful relationship as a head coach than it is as an assistant, just because of the setup of how we do it.
As a head coach, what is the toughest part of the job when it comes to dealing with other coaches? Forget the players and the administrative duties. Like, what is tough about being the head coach and dealing with your staff?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think being a head coach and getting on to a player for doing something they shouldn't be doing, or when it's time to do that, you don't really have a problem with that. It's more difficult doing that to an assistant, somebody that is really your friend, and you're in it together, and that's a challenge from time to time for sure, and just making sure you're holding them accountable. I was lucky to work for a great guy in Gene Depew, and think back to how he held me accountable to the things I needed to do, and was great at that. He certainly let me be me and gave me autonomy, but there definitely were times that he leaned on me a little bit in terms of what we were doing and what I was doing, and that's a challenge, and being able to do that and have that relationship with your assistant coach, that you're still you're the head coach, and you need to mentor them along the way, and there will be times that you need to get on them, and it's more on me, in terms of that, being willing to do that and not think too much about the consequences of that. At the end of the day, it's you're there to get better, and you're there to help him get better, and just following through with that is a challenge sometimes.
For assistant coaches that have the desire to become head coaches, which I think many of them do, it seems like, at least the ones I've talked to, and also I think many of them feel like they have a pretty good idea of what it means to transition to that side, right? What are they maybe not thinking of about that transition?
I think the pressures come from different spots. So, yeah, as an assistant, you really don't think about the pressures, or you don't think it's a big deal, you know, when you go through it and when you're seeing the head coach make decisions based on, you know, some of those pressures. And it's just different, you know, and you get driven to make decisions based on, you know, not just what you want to do from a baseball standpoint, but what the school wants, what the athletic department wants. And when you're assistant, you're really not concerned as much about what the athletic department wants. You're concerned with being the best baseball team you can, and you're kind of locked into that. But there's pressures that come from every angle, and you just think about different things that, you know, along the way as a head coach, and your mind's occupied a lot differently. And you know, there were a lot of times, you know, working for Coach Depew that I didn't necessarily understand the decisions he was making. But now, you know, being in that seat, I certainly see why. And there are factors that you just don't think about as an assistant. And until you're in that spot, you know, you really don't know, you know, what it's like, you know, to deal with that. And I think it's an important, you know, thing for an assistant coach to understand that sometimes those decisions that, you know, head coaches, you know, are going to make, you have to do with a lot of factors, and not just, you know, not just the, you know, the X's and O's of baseball. There may be, you know, certain things that are driving the decisions that are best for the program in the future, and that's important to understand.
As a head coach, I'm sure you want to clue your staff in and make them feel, you know, that they know as much as you know, but that can't possibly, you know, be realistic, right? Like, is there certain information that you have to deal with from maybe the top that simply is not allowed or appropriate to go past you?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a lot of things that I shield, you know, our staff from, and you know, I know the decision I have to make, and you know, discussing it or going over it with the coaches is not really going to change it. It is what it is, and that's a decision I have to make. But I'm a guy that does like to, you know, to get opinions, gather opinions from my staff, and you know, make sure I'm, you know, looking at all angles of it. You know, I like to have kind of a diverse staff, so, you know, I am thinking of all aspects. You know, so it is important to make sure, you know, they know what they, or they're gathering the information they need, you know, to do their job correctly, and you know, I try to do that as much as possible.
When you talk about the pressures and coming from different angles, are you referring to pressures from, you know, administration or donors, you know, things like that?
Sure. I mean, it comes from all angles, and obviously that's a part of it. You know, we're a program that is, you know, funded by our alumni, and you know, and obviously parents are a huge part of college baseball today, and that type of stuff, and you know, making sure you're addressing all aspects. That's not the only aspect. There's, you know, just pressures, you know, pressures to win, pressures to, you know, you start to, you know, pressures from home. I think one of the biggest challenges, you know, I have, you know, and is being the coach I want to, you know, be, and being the dad I want to be, and the husband I want to be, and that's a challenge. It's you know, there's not enough time in the day to really do, you know, a great job at both, but you really gotta, when it's time for baseball, I gotta be fully locked into that. And when I walk in the door, I gotta leave baseball behind, and be a dad, be a husband, and walk in there like that's the most important part of my day. And you know, that's a challenge sometimes, and you know, so it comes from all angles. You know, it's just a different job than being an assistant, and something that you don't truly understand until you dig into it, and you are one.
What's something that as an assistant you enjoyed doing that you will never be able to get back as a head coach?
Yeah, I think just digging in with the players. You know, it could be something mechanically. It could be, you know, developing as a baseball player. I spend a lot of time, you know, focusing on the man and building the man, and as a head coach, and obviously that was a part of an assistant. But the day to day, like just grinding it out in the cage, or you know, throwing a ton of BP to a guy, and getting in the bullpen and working on that type of stuff. That's, you know, that is my passion. You know, it's just the baseball part of it. I actually, this past year I started kind of a youth Wednesday night clinic, and I got to do that again. And I remembered, that passion that I have for that. And yeah, I do miss it, but you got to find ways to do it. And as a head coach, you got to be focused on finding ways to build that trust. And that's something I've really been working on, especially the last few years.
Again, this is all geared. I'm trying to make this unique and geared towards those coaches coming up through the ranks that want to be head coaches. For those guys, what are maybe the top 2 or 3 things that you would say, if you want to go into this head coaching role, be prepared to sacrifice A, B, and C?
Yeah, I think it starts with, kind of how you build the program and decisions you have to make. You will have to sacrifice things, and you should do that based on, on what's important to you. As I said earlier, I hired a pitching coach, even though I was a pitching coach, because I knew it was so important, and knew that I was going to be pulled in a lot of different directions. I was lucky to have a guy that I trusted there to have. I was lucky in being hired at the school I was an assistant coach at. Bucknell, actually, they didn't do it right away. It took a little bit. There was probably a month or so where I had a chance to prepare for the interview and really set the vision of the program, and take time on that every day. Talk to different coaches, not only in baseball, but different coaches at Bucknell, and really build my portfolio, and set the vision of the program of how I wanted it to be. And, I encourage, guys to do that, spend time on that and what their vision is going to be. So when the time comes, they're ready to go on that. And, you'll have to make decisions along the way. And maybe if I decided I still wanted to do the pitching and be involved in that, I'd have to have a guy to run the offense and really, hone in on that and give them that, so it's decisions you got to make along the way that fit what you want to do. And those are tough decisions to make, because you think you're going to still have that same relationship with guys that you had before, but how they receive your feedback is way different. It seems like an order to them, now as the head coach, when, a year earlier, it was you're just working with the guy.
Right. Rob DeToma at Fairleigh Dickinson, when I spoke with him, who obviously
for sure,
he talked about that, how in his first year, he kind of realized guys don't walk into the head coach's office as much. Guys don't. There's this fear, right, factor, and that's just a natural part of, I think, every structure out there. That he really missed as well. Like, come into the office and let's have those conversations that are not even baseball related.
Yeah.
If you could go back to your younger self right now, and you could teach your younger self something, and give your younger self advice based on what you know now about managing and being a head coach, what would you tell your younger version?
I think the most important thing, the thing I've learned along the way, and a lot of it was by making this mistake, and establish the vision and for what you want that guy to do. But you got to make sure the assistant coach understands that you hired them to do the job, and you believe in them, and you want them to be themselves. And I think where I failed in that at times is just not establishing the vision, creating the language that you want to continue year to year, but letting that guy be himself, and not continuing to hone in on that, and making, creating that language from a daily basis, but still letting the guy do his job day to day. That's where I feel like I could have done a way better job, and saying it just once isn't going to get it done. You got to continue to hone in on it. You got to continue to hold them accountable to the vision, but you got to give them the freedom to be themselves and let them go. And because that's the only way they're really going to truly enjoy it. that's the only way you're going to avoid nitpicking on things that are just unimportant. Because you want it a certain way, you got to be willing to let them do their job.
This has been very interesting, Coach Heather, and different, unique. Haven't had the opportunity to talk about this with anybody. So I truly appreciate you coming on here and discussing this, and educating the coaching community is really what this one is all about, and that younger generation coming up. So thank you so much for doing this.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
You stay safe, and hopefully I'll see you this summer.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it. Appreciate the time and what you're doing. It's been a joy and following. It's great to see as a head coach, all these assistant coaches. That's one of the things when I go out recruiting them, I'm evaluating coaches too. So it's cool to see all that.
Wait a second. You just took us down a whole new route. This isn't over then. This is not over yet. You are evaluating coaches while you're out recruiting players.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. Just tell me a little bit more about that before we go.
Yeah, I think you're always looking for guys to help your program, and it doesn't just end with the players. You have to continue. I think it's so important to hire guys that are going to help your guys get better, that are driven, and when I go out to an event, and I'm evaluating the coaches just as much, especially an event. Maybe I'm at an event where there's only a few players that I feel are good enough at the time that I'm watching. Well, I'll start to evaluate the coaches and who's still locked in, who's working hard, who's doing the right thing, who steps up when it's needed. I work a lot of events still, where there's a lot of coaches working the event, and that's part of it. And it's a great opportunity to get to know guys on a different level, and guys you may want to hire, and they may start to have a conversation. I may be just watching a guy have a conversation with a player, and how he treats the players, or is he does he feel like he's above what's going on right now. I'm always evaluating, that's something that is important to me, and it's why I still go out and work certain events, or try to be out as much as possible, because I know I'm going to have to hire guys on a pretty regular basis for my last two spots. And I'll even work events where I know there'll be a lot of younger guys, and start to get to know them. It's what better way to actually see them in that environment and what they're going to be like for you.
Okay, this is interesting now. So we go and we're watching a player, right? We see that player, yell at his coach or something like that, or do something that totally turns you off, right? Doesn't support, he has a bad outing maybe, and then he's totally out of the game, doesn't support his teammates. What is something that a coach can do that totally turns you off?
Yeah, for sure. I took it a different direction than I originally thought. With a coach, it's just basically how locked in they are. And are they on their phone all the time? A lot of times you do got to be on your phone. You got to find out where the next player is going to be. Like maybe down in Atlanta, and there's a lot of it, but there's a time to do it. Like there's a guy out there on the mound, throwing 86 to 88. Something like that. You shouldn't be looking at your phone till between innings, and just when you're doing it, and I love, I'm a between the innings type guy as an evaluator. I like to watch what's going on during that. I like to watch, a player, how his teammates react to him. That's one of the biggest things that I look for. Do his teammates like him? If I start to like a player, that's the next thing I'm evaluating. Are they happy when he has success? Is he happy for other guys, genuinely, or is he caught up in himself? That to me is a big indicator of a player. And so it's similar on the coaching side. What are they there for? They're there to evaluate? Are they there to just talk to other coaches? And are they talking about the next job all the time? And that type of stuff. Those are turnoffs for me. And you don't want a guy that's locked into what he's doing at the time and trying to be the best assistant at the time. I'm not looking to bring in a guy that's looking for his next job the day he steps on my campus, that type of deal.
I think we could come back and have a whole nother episode and discussion about this, about evaluating coaches. That's pretty interesting. So again, man, thank you. I'm glad you're watching and using quarantine coaches to do some scouting of other coaches, it sounds like. So
for sure. You've had a lot of great guys on, a lot of guys that I do see on the road, and enjoy getting to see another aspect of them, for sure. And appreciate what you're doing and what you do all the time and helping us find players.